Senator Mortimer, thank you for making the time to be here today.
Happy to be here, Kevin. As you know, education's the topic, and I'm happy to talk about it.
Well, the topic in education right now is unfolding on the House side, and you're kind of in wait-and-see mode. House Education Committee has had hours of hearings on Common Core standards. They had hours of hearings on Wednesday on the science standards. Your committee hasn't taken up the rules or these standards yet. What's your game plan on this?
I think it's unfair to say that we haven't taken up rules.
But the standards you haven't taken up.
We have not taken up the Omnibus standard,
Right.
which is the Omnibus rule, which is where the standards are housed. So we've had a hearing on all of the rules except for the Omnibus rule.
Mm-hmm. How do you see this playing out when you do take up the Omnibus rule? How much of an examination do you want to do on Common Core or science standards?
First, I think it depends a little bit on what happens over in the House. As you know, there's a discussion happening about how rules are approved, on how rules go from one body to the next body, how you respond to that one body to the next body. And we have been taking a wait and see on the omnibus legislation because we feel like that's respectful, and we recognize that the House does things differently than in the Senate. And when we're talking particularly about the standards, I think it's important to know that almost all of the Education Committee in the Senate side have discussed the Idaho standards multiple times. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think that the discussion will be in the depth that the House is having. I believe that the House is having their full hearings because I think it's good for not only our junior House members, but also for the public to be able to weigh in one more time. And so I think it will be a little more limited than what we've seen on the House side.
Because especially on the science standards, I mean, you took those up just 2 years ago. You voted on them as a committee 2 years ago.
That's exactly right.
How much of an appetite is there on your committee to revisit a decision that you made 2 years ago?
If I were trying to reflect what the Senate Education Committee is feeling today, I would say that they're indicating that we've heard them and we've made a decision once and we're not sure that we want to make that decision again because we've been there and heard them. Now that doesn't mean that we won't, but it does mean that we have heard the standards, we've made those decisions once, and we'll go from there.
Common Core is a little bit different matter because it does go back a few years. Mm-hmm. Take a step back from the process though, because the debate that we're hearing about Common Core or that we've heard in the House so far is you have educators saying, we're getting used to these standards, we don't want to go through the expense and the upheaval of changing standards along the way. You have critics saying they're really not producing improvement in terms of student performance. Where do you come down on all of that?
I think it's important to first understand that Idaho's content standards are not necessarily what people understand as Common Core. Idaho content standards have a lot of the standards that are in common with many other states. And as a matter of fact, most of Idaho's content standards are in common with most of our other states. We've done that for multiple reasons, so that we can compare, so that we can use standardized testing and save money from that way, and also because the Idaho content standard and the Common Core was taking and increasing the standard to a new level. And so from that standpoint, I think it's important to realize that implementing new Idaho content standards was a positive step. If you say and wrap around that all of the politicalness that came with Common Core and what people understand as Common Core, then you got to say there's some issues there that we probably ought to address from a state standpoint. And so I think that's a lot of what the House is trying to do, is saying it's time that we at least let a voice, that portion of our population that basically feels like the content standards are not doing exactly what they should be doing. This is the year that we get a chance to revisit that and look at it and think about it, and that's healthy for the process. The result will be interesting because as we go through it, the House has to make a decision of what they want to do, and they haven't come to a firm understanding. Right. And so I don't think that we want to try and react until we see where they're going.
And there's still no clear path forward how the House and the Senate are going to play together on rules.
I don't, yeah, and I don't think that we know yet, and so it's almost a day-by-day development, giving the House the ability to look at the standards and look at the rules the way they feel that they need to, and then giving the Senate the opportunity to do the same.
In contrast to all of this, Governor Little's budget requests and his budget recommendations on education, they're pretty straightforward. You've had a chance to digest them, and you've seen a lot of these ideas and recommendations from the task force last summer. What's your takeaway from the governor's budget requests? What did you like? What do you have questions about?
I think the governor has said, we implemented some things last year. Let's reinforce those things. You know, our K-3 literacy, our opportunity scholarship, our starting teacher salary. Those initiatives, governor initiatives, were started last year, and basically his budget reinforced those because there was some one-time monies used last year, and this year they're ongoing. So I believe that his budget was saying, let's do more of the same, but let's do it a little better.
Mm-hmm. One of the governor's budget recommendations is $30 million for veteran teacher pay. When this came up in the task force over the summer, you had some concerns about extending the career ladder to veteran teachers. Is it a structural concern? Is it a philosophical concern? Where are you?
And basically, I don't know exactly how the governor's, proposing that we use the $30 million. We know it's there. We know it's to be used for teacher salaries. My concern in our teacher salaries is making sure that what we have stays in place, and that the master teacher program, which is just in its first year in its infancy, isn't basically discarded before it has a chance to really work. The discussion of whether we had a master teacher premium occurred 2 or 3 years ago, and the education community said, yes, let's have it, let's keep it. And to just say, well, we're going to all of a sudden make a major change, I have a concern with doing away with our master teacher premium without giving it a chance to really work.
Another topic that's near and dear to your heart after several years, and you're just starting to talk about the mechanics of it in committee, is rewriting the school funding formula. Where do you see that going this session? Do you see that getting done this year?
I think I would love to say, yes, we're going to get it all done. I believe that we will see a continuation of some of the efforts that we had last year. And yesterday in Senate Ed, we had the discussion on enrollment. Mm-hmm. And I was very pleased with what the department and the board have done on getting some enrollment numbers and trying to think in advance of how that compares to average daily attendance.
Right. It's dense, but it's a whole different math, how you define how much time a student is spending in school.
Right. And so I think from a limited standpoint, we might get enrollment and maybe a few tweaks around how the funding works, but it's going to take a monumental effort on all of the legislature and the governor if we were to try and implement the full funding formula the way we proposed last year.
And a need for a lot of buy-in from the education community. The House had registered some concerns about it last year. I mean, there's a long way to go.
So I think it's time to start working in increments, and I think this year we'll make a significant incremental change. I believe we'll get something done on enrollment, and to me that's a huge step forward, not only for the funding formula, but for mastery-based education and flexibility in our education system. Changing from an average daily attendance to an enrollment or course-based system is fundamental to changing and flexibility within education.
I think we're going to have to leave it there, but stay tuned on standards, stay tuned on funding formula, it sounds like.
Great. Looking forward to it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin.